Hello and welcome to question and answer time number 12. I'm Adam Neely, and yes, that is the audio that's being recorded right now. Yeah, that definitely clipped. Anyway, I'm here answering all of your questions about bass and music in general, so let's get started.
Adam, have you ever played down in the subway in New York? You said you take the train regularly. Have you ever ran into some of the famous bands down there, like Too Many Zoos or Moonhooch? You should totally do a video on the New York subway music scene.
Yes, I am of course well aware of Too Many Zoos and Moonhooch. In fact, two of the guys from Too Many Zoos played at my graduate recital, Matt and Leo. You can see here Matt sporting the very sexy pink coat that I made him wear for my graduate recital because I thought it was funny. And yeah, I ride the subway all the time, and it's kind of hard not to know, what's going on around you because it's pretty much there in your face, especially when it's showtime. I moved to New York in 2010, and back then there was the Bloomberg administration, and the police would hassle you a lot more when you busked. And I busked a couple times with my friends, and we were asked to move along a couple times, even though there was no law in New York City that says that you can't play in the subway. And unfortunately, we were white and we got hassled a lot less than, our black musician friends who were playing down there. But fortunately, the de Blasio administration came in and it's a much more welcoming environment for musicians in the subway. So you had this explosion of all this subway music, which is awesome. And, there was this incident a couple years ago where you had this viral video of this musician in the Greenpoint subway station, or Broadway subway station somewhere in Brooklyn, of basically fighting the man because a cop told him to move along and he refused. And the general reaction among a lot of people in the New York City music subway scene was, this guy is a tool. Who is this hipster piece of shit? Basically. Because the general consensus among all the subway musicians is, yeah, this cops will hassle you sometimes, but you want to play nice with them because they'll be on your side in case any local color happens. And this is sort of like the badge of honor is, the cops might, hassle you a little bit in the beginning when you first start playing at a spot, but eventually they'll leave you alone. And the badge of honor is if a cop gives you $1, and that's when you know that you really made it. Anyway, it's a really fascinating thing. I haven't really done a whole lot of busking recently, but Too Many Zoos and Moonhooch and Lucky Chops, I know a bunch of people in those bands personally. They're all awesome. And yeah, come to New York and see them play.
Do you have a link to your ASCAP performance? I would love to hear the whole composition.
I do. If you'd like to listen to the whole performance, it's all in the description. I wrote a 30-minute tone poem for the end of the world called Exigence. It's the end of the world by way of apathy and the internet age. And there was this whole projection going on behind it. It was awesome. So check it out. I hope to do it again someday. Maybe. Who knows?
Adam, I have a hypothetical question. If you're allowed/forced to convert all of your skill and knowledge of music into another discipline, what would it be?
Mortuary Science.
What do you think of piano roll notation? It seems to this amateur that the main drawback is it would take far too much paper. But now with paperless media, PRN seems so much more like the metric system than the comparatively non-intuitive, monastic, or classical notation... ... I can, of course, represent any time signature, etc. I know it's laughed at by serious musicians, but you seem open-minded about the evolution of different types of music and thought. Thanks.
I think piano roll notation is really useful. I mean, I don't really actually read it that well and work with it that well myself, but I can get around it pretty decently, and I know a lot of really amazing musicians who definitely read the piano roll and are able to write in the piano roll way better than anything else. And I know that Hans Zimmer doesn't even read standard notation, he just works in the piano roll. It's a very powerful tool, I think. And the thing I like to think about the piano roll is it's kind of like tab for piano players, kind of. Because it's hard to translate when you're reading on a different instrument the notes that you're seeing on the piano roll to that other instrument. It's very difficult versus when you're playing piano, there's something more visual and visually striking about it that makes more sense for piano. So I like it. It's cool. It's interesting. It's something that has only come about in the past couple decades, so there isn't a whole body of literature on how to interpret piano roll notation for the performing musician, but I think it's something that's very interesting and I'm excited to see what happens with it.
Hey Adam, I hope you see this question as I've been confused for a while now with this. So I've been listening to some jazz covers of the song I Could Have Danced All Night from My Fair Lady, and the first cover I found was by Chet Baker with Bill Evans. When I listened to it, I noticed that the time signature is 3/4 instead of 4/4 like on the original and every other cover. So ever since I've been trying to figure out how they managed to play a song originally in 4/4 and 3/4. Thanks in advance.
That's awesome. I actually never knew that it was in 4/4, and going back and listening to it is wow, that makes sense in 4/4. I've always heard it in the 3/4, I could have danced all night, I could have danced. It's fascinating because that's not the only song where that's the case, where there might be more than one sort of time signature involved in how we perceive it. Fly Me to the Moon was originally in 3/4, not 4/4. So it's fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. So it's a cool thing. I'm not really quite sure. Maybe I'll do a video about it at some point, but thank you for bringing that up.
Would you consider a fretless acoustic bass a decent transition instrument to the upright? I know the pizzicato technique would be very different. I was thinking more on the ear training aspect and developing intonation.
I would definitely not think about the fretless acoustic bass as a like starter instrument for upright bass. It's definitely its own thing. It's similar to upright in a lot of regards, but you know, if you want to play upright, just get an upright. That's the case right there. Fretless acoustic bass is a fantastic instrument, and you have people like Ronan Guilfoyle who play it, and it sounds amazing. But it's really its own thing.
Ha! Nice to see you having been on the Linkin Park hype train also. Been wanting to ask you about your taste in music, so I'm glad you brought that up. I have another question though, that being, do you consider your vast knowledge about music theory as a burden in any way? I.e., I've done some studio work myself, and listening to music is sometimes more about wondering how something has been recorded to make it sound the way it sounds. Do you think that theoretical understanding has made you like/dislike some songs/artists/genres? Sorry if my English is crappy, not my native language.
Two things. Never apologize for your crappy English, because I guarantee you it's better than mine and any other one of my fellow Americans, because we do not talk English very good. Second thing is, yeah, music theory can be a hindrance, I suppose, but only if you let it. It's up to you to understand how theory shapes your worldview, and you know what your taste in music is doesn't always have to be based upon like whether or not it has seventh chords. Like, you know, in the beginning, maybe you're going to take that knowledge of music theory and you're going to listen to something critically, and that's great because, you know, it's always nice to be able to hear like, oh, that's the 1 chord going to the 4 chord or whatever. But then there's this tendency for some people to be like, oh, that music isn't complicated. You know, I only listen to technical death metal or jazz because the music is more complicated and therefore it's for the thinking person. Your musical taste should go beyond this though, because the more that you end up learning, the more you realize, oh wait, no, that's not the case. You know, there's all this other stuff to learn beyond the 1s, the 2s, and the 3 chords. Music is a lot richer than that. There's a lot more detail that's put into other kinds of music that might not be on the surface what you're thinking about in terms of Western music theory. And that's the thing to keep in mind.
Question. I'm a classical nerd on a guitar site, so some of the things that people say there have been hard for me to accept. I finally got my head around major 6th chords a few months ago. Root is the most important in this case, and minor 6th chords are okay too, but what about minor flat 6 chords? Example C, E flat, G, A flat. To my classical taste, the A flat just sounds like an accented non-chord tone over a C root instead of an A flat major 7 in first inversion.
Great question. Back in the 18th century, the chord that you describe actually would have been called a C-rooted chord. And it wasn't until this guy, Rameau, came along that we then created this idea of inversions and functional harmony. But back when Bach was writing, Bach wasn't really thinking about that as being a A-flat rooted chord. He was thinking about it as a C-rooted chord. And it just goes to show you how much theory has changed. We have basically like completely redesigned the way that we think about music just, you know, over the past 300 years. And so the way that Bach was thinking about his music, he wasn't thinking about chords, he wasn't thinking about inversions, he was thinking very differently than how we think about his music now. And I think that's a really interesting idea and something that I might talk about in the future.
I just recently discovered your channel and have been binge watching your videos over the past couple of days. Very cool stuff and definitely worth rewatching and internalizing what you say. Great work, dude. Also, and why I chose to comment on this video, have you ever heard of Beardyman or his, Herbie Hancock approved, Beardytron 5000? He does improvised electronic music. I would be quite interested in hearing your thoughts on him and especially his mutant electronic creation.
I love Beardyman. Beardyman's awesome, and if you haven't checked him out, please check him out. I kind of like his older stuff a little bit better. It's a little grungier and rawer, but you know, his newer stuff with all the iPads, that's really cool. The thing that I like about Beardyman is he is in complete control of the technology that he uses. He has really shed that technology so much. He's really practiced it. He knows it in and out. And that's the, you know, the mark of somebody who's really a great musician, is they really know their instrument. And for him, his instrument is his voice, but it's also the, you know, all the crazy technology that he uses, and he has really mastered all of it. Anything new that he does, he really spends the time to like really understand it, to the point where he can improvise with it and just go crazy and let his mind go wild, which is so cool watching it. Please check out Beardyman if you haven't before. It's really cool stuff.
I might have asked this on another video, but it hasn't been answered by anyone, so... Hey, bass players, do bassists argue about whether tube tone matters? Do they hate solid-state amps the way a lot of guitarists do? Do they even make tube amps for basses?
Honestly, solid-state amps are totally fine for us bass players. Yeah, I mean, solid-state amps are terrible on guitar. They don't respond to the dynamics really well and musically at all, but on bass guitar, they can, and they do very, very well. It's not that we don't like tube amps, you know, a good SVT can be fantastic, but solid-state amps can work just as well for certain musical situations, so it's not something that we care about so much.
I like your discussion on free will. It's mostly the way I have thought. It's surprising how quickly determinism is dismissed right away in many texts and discussions. Bass-wise, my son is prepared to audition for college undergrad for jazz bass for fall 2017. You are based in New York, and have discussed the various New York schools' alumni networks. Is there any advantage to going to school in New York to establish oneself in a great venue during college versus preparing oneself outside of the area and arriving later with more skills to make a first impression on the scene then?
I mean, I really wouldn't worry about like making a first impression on the scene because there's so many musicians here, and if you're first coming here, you're not going to be playing in front of like really important people. And even if you do find a situation where you're playing in front of like somebody very important, they're not going to remember you, one, and two, there's so many other important people, so it doesn't even freaking matter. If your son's end goal is to come to New York City, just after college, maybe just, go to a New York City music school, because in addition to having like fantastic music schools in New York, it really like acclimates you to the scene. And, it's a very aggressive environment. It's a very, unforgiving environment. And it can be hard to just hop in and acclimate yourself to it if you're coming from somewhere out of state, because, it's kind of an assault on your sensibility, assault on your senses. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that first impression thing at all, because honestly, in this case, it doesn't matter.
Where do you think music would be today if the rules of classical music theory, as they are known and taught today, weren't broken at some point after their implementation? I think about this a lot and how bleak the musical timeline would be if everyone listened to the ABRSM, who I personally think are spawning a generation of musicians who will be mostly incapable of handling themselves in high-level professional environments. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, as I think there is a place for standardized music education. However, I think the systems in place may choke the creativity out of young people and put off many potentially great talents.
First of all, I had to look up what the ABRSM is, because as an American, we do not have any of that stuff. Second of all, I'd like to say that whenever you have somebody who's creating something new and exciting, they aren't really breaking rules so much as they're just creating another aesthetic. But they can be very acutely aware and draw influence from things that had come before. When Bach was writing, he was taking the music of Palestrina, who was writing 150 years earlier than Bach. When the jazz musicians of the 40s, 50s, and 60s were playing, they were taking, the old-time moldy fig jazz of the 20s, and then also taking ragtime music, and then classical music, and all sorts of stuff. And they were creating their new aesthetic with it. So it's not so much that people break rules, because this obsession with breaking rules can be kind of weird and almost cultish. Like, you have to break the rules. You have to know what the rules are, and you have to understand what they are, and then do something different with them, maybe.
Hey Adam, thank you so much for your exquisite videos. I was wondering, what are your goals as a musician? Do you want to be the Mozart of jazz composing, or are you more interested in teaching and going at music at an academic level?
The Mozart of jazz composing. Yeah, not really. Honestly, I just want to continue making the music that I want to make, continue playing music with the people I want to play with, continue meeting cool musicians, getting to play in interesting places, and to continue growing my, teaching opportunities, whether it be through YouTube or potentially at some point at the university level. I mean, it's at the end of the day, I just want to keep doing what I'm doing and just grow it. I don't have any lofty delusions of grandeur or whatever, because that's not productive. That doesn't make me happy, and it doesn't really do anything. So I just want to keep doing what I'm doing.
Hey Adam, how do we find out where you're going to be playing? I live upstate and I'd love to come see you live and maybe chat for a bit.
If you want to follow me, maybe follow me on Facebook. You can subscribe to me on Facebook, and I generally gig spam. I make all those posts public so everybody can see, in case, I don't get around to adding you as a friend. So come say hi. It'd be fantastic if you did.
Great vid. Love your work. It's GR8. We really needed this kind of YT channel. BTW, what do you think about playing gigs on a 40 watts amplifier? To me, bass doesn't need that much of watts, and needing watts means that the bass isn't used the right way. There's no good way, but you got it right.
I mean, for me personally, that's way too quiet. The way that you have to think about for bass is that the wattage of your amplifier has to be 4 times that of the guitar player. So if the guitar player is playing out of a 25 watt amplifier, you need at least the bare minimum 100 watt amplifier to compete in volume with the guitar player. So 40 watts is a little quiet, especially if you don't have anything coming out of the PA or anything. If it's just your monitor, yeah, maybe, but that's not very loud at all, especially to compete with a guitar player and a drummer.
Hi Adam, I really like your videos. It's informative, inspiring, and entertaining. Only channel I subscribe to. What I would like to see is a video about good band sounds for bass. They say good solo sound is never good band sound, and if you play solo, you tend to dial in a mid-scoop/smiley EQ. This is true for me, but what is a good band sound and how to achieve it? Some say it's just the lows, or with a little bit of mids, or just the mids in the lows just muddy up all the sound and need a little bit of distortion. I also understand that it must be different depending on the style of music, but how? In addition, I found out the bass can be much louder, too loud, in the audience when I as the player can hardly hear myself. Additional problem, dialing in sound has to go very fast, because being a beginner band, we share the stage with other bands for sets of 3 or 4 songs, so there's no sound check and no PA, of course. Would you, for example, make a video with a good band sound and with and without a band so we can hear how it fits in the overall sound and what tone to strive for? That would be great. Thanks a lot for all the work you put into this.
For me personally, I generally keep the treble knob flat or like at noon. If I need to roll off treble, I'll do it on my bass with the tone knob. I keep the high mids a little, I turn them down a little bit, but then I really bump the low mids because those are the ones that you really feel as a bass player, and those are the ones that, you know, your ear really, in the general mix of a band, the low mids are where you hear the pitch of the bass. And then depending on the room, I might turn the bass down just a little bit. Or I could turn it up if, you really need that sub bass happening. But generally speaking, on amplifiers, I turn the bass down just a smidge and let most of the low mids do the work for me. And if it might not be the prettiest sound when you're playing alone in a room, but man, you will be able to hear yourself and your bass crystal clear in the context of performing ensembles. And that's generally what I like to think. Bump the low mids. You're good with the low mids.